This is the StoryWorks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft. Because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. Hello and welcome to this week's StoryWorks Roundtable. Today, Robert, Kathryn, and I are going to try to take a different approach in looking at what's happening with the coronavirus. We know everybody and their uncle is talking about it right now, and lots of people are talking about what to do and how to manage it. But this is a show about storycraft and writing process. So with that in mind, we're going to explore what this means to us as writers and artists, and look at it from a different angle than most other people. We hope, right? So one thing kind of as a jumping off point is there's a New York Times article that we all just read, and it raised, we'll link to it in the show notes, but one of the questions it raised is, when do you write about something like this? How soon is too soon? And the author mentioned stories about 9/11 that came out on the heels of 9/11, even if that was 2 or 3 years later, and, have they stood the test of time? So I don't know, do either of you feel a pull to write about this experience, or do you have a sense of when it becomes time to write about something like this?
I suppose some of that depends on whether you're leaning into journalism as your craft or you've got specific fiction ideas in mind. Mm-hmm. I think it would be tough I would find it tough to actually pen a novel around it. And just a quick aside as well, while we're on this call, we, as always, I like to have a little bit of levity even when times are tough. Mm-hmm. But obviously this is a very serious time for everybody, and we do hope that all your loved ones are safe and everybody stays as healthy as possible. And hopefully you can take some of the levity that might come in this podcast as a little bit of an escape while apparently the world crumbles around us. I think I was thinking about this yesterday as well, because it's definitely, it imposes emotional states on us that are not necessarily of our own doing. So I think, we've had shows before about people who have struggled with their own levels of depression and anxiety as an ongoing issue. And this is a little different because it's externally enforced. I was just briefly speaking offline about the fact that it's tempting to sort of news check every hour or more frequently, just to make sure that nothing even worse has just happened, and often
right.
It has. And so, that can set up a sense of jittery sort of sense that's hard to put the creative hat on. So I think it's important to make notes. But as I was thinking about this yesterday, it's also it's a time where you can explore your own emotional reactions to things, because if you're going to, we all talk about this, if you're writing fiction, you take your characters and you put them in dire situations and you try and write them out of it. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that brings that to life is what goes through those characters' minds and hearts while that happens. Mm-hmm. And here we are experiencing that. So, whether you're going to note that in a journal or actually do some writing on it, I think that's perfectly fine. I would suspect that because things are running hot in your own mind with it, it might be something that's good to rest and come back to, purely because, as you said, Alida, not necessarily it's too soon for the public, but maybe it's just too soon for us, because to me it feels as if, and I'll stop in a minute and let someone else talk. If those sort of late nights when you have that brilliant idea and you're sort of lying on the bed, oh, that's right, I could have this fantastic creature come in and these 2 young kids are forced to battle it, and so you write it all down, and the next morning you look at it, you think that is the biggest pile of rubbish I've ever read. And I think the temptation with this is that this is just all-consuming, and I suppose what we will hope is that in 5 years' time we all look back at this and go, that was awful, wasn't it? It was just awful. So it's tempting to write it as if it's overwhelming, but I think that's a great thing to grab for future fiction.
Yes. Yeah. As usual, I feel like you touched on multiple things, and I'm like, which one do we want to address first? Where's the...
We'll give Kathryn a go.
Well, yes, I do think, though, what you said about the journal now, addressing when to write about this, write about it now, but for yourself. So that you do capture the experience and the rawness and the emotions of it, so that when it is time to write something story-wise that you're crafting for an audience, you've got the rawness captured. Kathryn?
Well, and also, I think as a creative, we process things through story better. So I think taking the time, like recognizing, like you were saying, Robert, my head is not in whatever project I'm working on. I need to take the time to write down how it feels to be this isolated, this anxious, all these news things hitting me all at once. And then maybe after dumping it, you can let it exist separate from what you are currently working on, instead of allowing it to seep in and just invade your every waking thought and moment.
Yeah, and I have thought too about some of the difficulties my protagonist is going through in the current work in progress, and it crossed my mind yesterday, the day before, whenever, that some of this anxiety, some of this emotion happening right now, I might be able to apply that to my protagonist. And we've all had anxiety before, we've all had difficulties before, but this overwhelming scale of it, I think, is quite different. Yeah. Have you been thinking about craft as you experience it? Are you sort of living with the foot in each world right now, saying, what do I do with this as an artist, and what do I do with this just as a human being getting through the day?
Yeah, I haven't thought about what do I do with it as an artist, but I haven't stopped thinking about my own fiction. I think I feel like I've had a couple of glimpses in my mind, and I haven't done anything with them, but maybe that's a thing to note down as well. In terms of human behaviour, because fiction is such a reflection of human behaviour, and we've seen some bizarre extremes, I suppose, of it that maybe a lot of us look down our noses at, but let's face it, we're all come from the same species, we're all part of that. So somewhere inside of me there's that same drive that when I walk into a supermarket and I see the aisle nearly bare of toilet paper, I suddenly think, oh my god, I must get some toilet paper. And that's an interesting motivation, because you sort of think, well, if there's a global pandemic, everything that we've watched and read suggests that it's going to be people grabbing guns and defending their houses. No, it's going to be people battling in the aisles in supermarkets.
Yes, yes, fighting over the last roll of Charmin.
Right. So there's a twist, I suppose, and it's not a pleasant twist, because it's what we're having to live at the moment, and it feels bad. Nonetheless, it's still an observational twist. So I think if you can be the observer in this particular time, that is one of the most powerful things I think any artist can do, to be honest, and that's
right.
Where some of our great artistic legacies have come from.
Yeah, I agree. And as you were talking, it got me thinking, one of the things I see quite often in manuscripts is that writers are being too nice to their characters. They don't go far enough, and they don't let their characters' behavior go far enough, because we like our characters and we've developed them, and they have all of these strengths and good qualities. And it's easy to think, to turn on your internal critic or your censor and say, that wouldn't happen, that's too unreal, that's too illogical, that's too unrational. But then look around us and gosh, maybe your character would, throw down over a pack of toilet paper. Like, whatever situation you're creating, seeing what's going on around us now when panic really does rule the day, it's a good reminder as we're creating situations for our characters to open up, unleash, and say, yeah, this could escalate that far. You know, what is my situation? What is the absolute outer limit of possibility for this situation? Because it might be quite a bit further out than you would have thought normally, right?
Yeah. So you stretch the extremes, because you can always dial those back. I think, as you said, there's a tendency to write, when, especially for new writers, to write more like every day. And one of the things that we do when we're writing, putting my other hat on of writing book descriptions, for example, is you try to up the stakes in every single sentence. It's quite difficult to do, because sometimes you think, am I doing this book justice? You know, but for the casual browser who's just looking to pick up a book, you've got to strike at their emotions very fast. And sometimes it's hard to do, because you look at the book synopsis and go, okay, well, actually, there's not very high stakes in this book. So, you know, one would hope that it's delivered at a literary level that doesn't matter so much when you come down to the actual delivery of the manuscript. But, you know, sometimes it's hard to do that. So I think a good thing to do is, you know, have I placed enough stress? Think to yourself, have I placed enough stress on this character? Can I push their reaction to the extreme? And does it still fit? And if it doesn't, you can always dial it back a bit. But writing it, underplaying everything, just makes for a boring story, frankly.
Exactly. Yeah. And some of the greatest moments in fiction come when the character does breach social bounds, does breach the sort of rules of normalcy. One moment that comes to mind is in Fried Green Tomatoes, and I'm going to reference the movie scene because it's so vivid in my mind, but Kathy Bates's character is trying to get the parking spot in the grocery store lot, and these girls in a little convertible cut her off and zip into the spot. When they get out, one of them sasses her and says, "Face it, lady, we're younger and faster," right? And she's upset, and then her face kind of lights up and she steps on the gas and like howls in glee as she rear ends their car. And then she reverses and she does it again, like 6 or 7 times. And the girls run back screaming, and she goes, "Face it, girls, I'm older and I have better insurance." And drives off. Right? Now, imagine if the author had gone, well, what would a reasonable person do in this moment? You would scowl and you would complain to your best friend, and you would maybe drink a glass of wine when you got home and complain about those girls. Right? We would be missing that moment.
Take it to extremes and throw an egg at their car.
Right. Yes. No. I've got better insurance.
Yeah, I like that idea of, you know, what you can, and it's kind of, you know, that you have obviously got to foreshadow that that's going to be even an impossibility for that character to break out like that at some point. If it comes totally out of the blue, then unless you're a great writer, I think that can somehow seed that or reverse it after the event. But yes, I think that is lovely when you get those moments. Where a story just suddenly takes a twist you didn't see coming, but still makes perfect sense.
Makes total sense. Yes, and it's such a delightful moment to live vicariously through that character. You know, it feels so outrageous and yet completely justified. So
that's just triggered something for me. So that's the interesting thing, isn't it? When you look at global times like this, there is no living vicariously. So I suppose that's why fiction that mirrors it seems trivial, dismissive, poorly timed, you know, or on the other hand, people might be drawn to it, which I'm sure Kathryn will refer to shortly.
Yes, yeah, I was just thinking the same thing, Kathryn.
You know, maybe it's because it doesn't have that vicarious nature, because either it doesn't make sense to people, I don't want to read about this, or go, oh yeah, whatever, yeah, you know, just that you might think that's bad, but you know, see every business in my locality is closing down because of this. So does real life seem so much more dramatic or melodramatic that fiction no longer means anything?
Or it means more because we need the escapism. We need, I think in times of crisis, historically, movie ticket sales have gone up. And today I think that has transferred to the world of streaming. But, during the Great Depression, the movie theater was the means of social escapism. And now I'm going to turn it over to Kathryn, because Robert and I have both alluded to this.
I know, right? I mentioned that if you look at some of the top movies on streaming platforms right now, like the ones that are being streamed are the ones about pandemics or global disasters. It doesn't necessarily have to be disease, but just global disasters. And I think part of that, is the escapism. You want to see something so much bigger even than what we're already experiencing, that you feel like, okay, I can handle the fact that the grocery store is out of rice. I'll be okay, because at least I'm not quarantined on a hospital ship in the middle of the Pacific Ocean while California is falling into the water, or whatever it is. So I think there's two sides to that. There's the fiction doesn't do it quite justice, right? Maybe fiction that came out specifically about a pandemic like this would be a little too on the nose, and people go, that wasn't my experience. I didn't, feel like that. I didn't seem like that, or it doesn't go far enough, maybe. Or there's the other side of it where it's like, I want to watch some people who do the impossible and make it out of something way worse than what I'm experiencing right now.
Right.
So I think there's two sides to that.
Well, and what about saturation? I mean, I'm a little surprised and also not surprised, but my first reaction was surprised that people would want to watch apocalyptic dramas when we're in the middle of something that feels kind of apocalyptic, instead of wanting a comedy, a romance, some lighter fare, because I certainly feel like I'm approaching my saturation point with bad news and bad feelings, and all of that heavy stuff is going to be there tonight, tomorrow, next week, I'm sure. So to be able to take a break with a book or with a film and shift my mindset, shift the feelings, get rid of some of that heaviness for a while is very appealing. But what do you, I don't know, what are your thoughts on why the movies of doom are spiking right now? It'd be interesting to see what happens in the next couple weeks, right? Because right now we're still kind of on that cusp where people can't quite believe it's happening. What do you mean I can't go to my favorite restaurant down the street? Why are they closed? I can't gather with more than 10 people. I mean, what is all this, right? You're still kind of in this transitional flux. So you're still, everything's still new. A couple weeks from now, when you're entering week 3 of cooking at home every night, or, only people you see is your family, and the news keeps getting darker and people keep dying. At that point, it will be interesting to see what the trend flips to, because I could see where it starts leaning more into the lighthearted, into the more rompy adventure stories with, comic value out off the charts kind of a thing. So it'll be interesting to see what happens to the media consumption. Right. So it could be the novelty now, but then we're going to hit that saturation point and need to flip the switch.
And also, I wonder if for some people who bottle things up, it's a way of letting those emotions run. Sure. Because they're being driven by the movie, and the movie will have, and this is where story I think is fantastic, a good movie or a good story will have an arc, and so you'll be able to allow yourself to be pulled along with the emotional ups and downs, and as you say, many of those don't have grimpock endings. So there's maybe it's a way of seeing a light at the end of the tunnel for people who feel that everything around is dark, and a way of people who are overly stoic, who aren't able or don't have people around. There's no one around to help them process their emotions. Perhaps story is the way to do it. And that occurred to me as well, that we, as artists, can also, depending on how you feel. I mean, I would struggle to do this, but I've been exposed to some artists. Stephen Pressfield is one, for example, who's been posting things on his website that are reflections. And he posted a poem from someone else about pandemic, and there are people who have locals in the community who have written small messages of hope and distributed them around neighbours' letterboxes. So I think story has a place if we can allow everything not to take us to those dark places. Then it can be a way that people come together. Even simple Facebook memes are really stories that you can grab onto. In a time where everybody's forced apart, this is the best way to come together. Simple pithy messages like that. Somebody cobbled that sentence together. So there's a place for it too, if you're prepared to be bold and lead. And I've never been very good at that.
I think allowing people to feel what they need to feel is something that story has a gigantic capacity for, right? And so like you were saying, Robert, like it doesn't always have to be, let's talk about the anxiety, let's talk about the isolation, let's talk about this feeling of claustrophobia that's kind of taking over, right? It can be hope, it can be light, meaning like light, physical light, not you know what I mean, not buoyant, but you know what I mean. So you can channel your ability to use story in creating safe emotional spaces for people to feel, and that I think is what people need right now. They need the ability to express, this is how I feel, and maybe it's hard for people to say out loud how they feel. So that's why things like that, poetry like that, little notes like that shared around so well. People want to be able to say, this is how I feel, acknowledge me a little bit, right? And then also, like, do you feel the same? Because our community is broken right now, and to be able to feel like you're still part of a community is really important.
Right. So there's the cathartic experience, whether it's positive or negative, and the question of light versus dark. I mean, we've kind of been focusing on this experience of the dark side, but is there a light side to this emerging already? And as artists, are you drawn to capture it? Or are you drawn to go sit down and write a light story instead of a dark story, to sort of invent your own form of escapism that's also productive? So kind of leading us away from audience into creator territory here. I don't know. I'm just going to throw that out there without a formed question.
Right, exactly. I feel like for me, I very much am drawn toward the thematic things that are coming out of this rather than like the situational things, right? Yeah. So I don't necessarily want to explore a pandemic story. It's just not something that I would enjoy writing as a creator. But it is very interesting to me to see the themes of community and, life continuing and like little things like that. So I think I would be drawn to write a very thematically driven story rather than like an action-driven pandemic story, like what I'm saying.
Yeah. And would you move thematically toward toilet paper hoarding or toward lovely poems in mailboxes?
I would much more move toward the light and the hope, I think, because you are seeing people, the better sides of people in a lot of ways too. And I think that people... That's what I would want to focus on. I don't want to focus on the people who are literally stockpiling so that their neighbors can't have any, right? We want to focus on the people who are walking around to all their neighbors and knocking on the door and leaving a note that says, if you don't have toilet paper, I do. Right? So, but yeah, I would definitely lead toward that lighter side, the hope.
Yeah. How about you, Robert?
I don't know. I think I will. Things that occur to me are taking snippets of, well, this is what it was like to be in confinement. That sort of thing. I quite enjoy stories where characters are up against each other very in their face. Even though I tend to like writing space opera, I like pitting characters against one another. I think that's one of the things I always loved about classic sci-fi, is it was never about the gadgets and the science, but it was about changes in society that caused human behavioural differences. And we're living inside one of those now, really, I suppose. And so would I go for the light or the dark? I think I'm not one. It's interesting, isn't it, that today, as we record this, our episode on dark endings
was aired today. Yes,
it's all our fault.
Oh, dang it! If only we hadn't put that vibration into the universe. Dark endings. Here comes the plague.
So we're now going to do a whole series of episodes on the light and hope and
unicorns and fairies. Right. Coming up next week.
But I've never really liked stories where the resolution is grim and hopeless. A tragedy, I don't mind tragedies, but they've got to give some resolution that otherwise you just, you finish reading the book and you think, right, okay, now what?
Yes.
It's horrible. So I'm unlikely to take what appears to be, awful worldwide fear and panic and turn that into something that's even worse. I just don't think that's me. I think I tend to be rather eternally optimistic with a subplot of anxiety.
Right.
Yeah. I recently reread Of Mice and Men, and it's such a tragic story, with Lenny being killed at the end, essentially euthanized in order to save him from a worse fate. George, I'm assuming everyone knows the story, right? But Lenny is developmentally disabled and George is his caretaker, and Lenny gets in some trouble that's going to lead to a lynching, so George kills him in order to avoid a much worse fate. And it's such a tragic story, but it's also so full of compassion and humanity, and it's not just between those two characters. It's the other men in the bunkhouse and the cook, who's an African American, and so he's very isolated from the other ranch hands. And yet, all of these characters, we glimpse their humanity, their compassion, their connection and connectedness, even in these very dark circumstances. And I think as artists, part of our responsibility to humanity, to our audience, is not just to depict the drama of the dark things, but also what unifies us, what keeps us human, to find the light of humanity, even if it's only in these glimmers through these characters, who are making those connections and standing out. And that, of course, is a Great Depression story, so another tough time to live through.
Yes, it's all anybody who's ever thought, these artists who've really produced great art, and it's always come about when things have been really tough. Well, now's your time. Your calling is here. Right. But I think what you're saying is that maybe that is what we see behind the drive for people to consume those sort of stories about global, Armageddon type stories. Is that what we actually want to see is, where's the heart? Where's that one or two people in there, and maybe they're the hero, who do something that's majorly heroic. Now, maybe it's off in space and killing themselves to save an asteroid hitting Earth. or maybe it's because they go to a neighbour and their act of kindness, so it stops that neighbour from taking their own life. You know, there's where is the heart in all of this? And I think that is something you could write about now.
Right.
And you could publish now, and it will be perfectly fine. So I think, you know, what is too soon? It's never too soon to publish stories of hope and heart. I think that is part of the underlying trope of human narrative. Personally, you know, yes, there might be grim stories that take over our culture for a while, like the Game of Thrones type of thing. But again, they're a kind of it's like the spectators at the gladiatorial fighting. You know, we actually don't want to be in that. We just want to watch it. But if those times come on us and we are watching it, we don't want to watch more of it. We just want to see the hope and the heart. So my recommendation is find stories of hope and heart, personally.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Very concise. The hope and the heart. And that's really what we're looking for, whatever else the story is about. And I think the beautiful thing about that is you could be writing the comedy or the romance and fill it with hope and heart, or you could be writing the tragedy or the post-apocalyptic story, and you can still have the hope and the heart at the core of it, you know, because really isn't that what pulls us into and through those stories, is connecting with the protagonist we care about and believe in, and, you know, finding that thread of hope or that piece of humanity. So should we touch on process as writers, you know, shut in, working from home? Most of us, unless someone is in healthcare and really on the front lines right now. I mean, so many businesses have shut their doors, sent everyone into work from home mode. Are you finding yourself with extra time? Are you finding yourself creative? Is this kind of a break from the real world, or is it just too much?
Nothing's changed for me, because I work from home all the time anyway. So that's been a blessing, obviously. And if anything, with multiple online businesses, that's again another blessing. We do have a short-term holiday rental house that's normally extremely busy, and of course we've been having lots of cancellations. And there are people actually in Australia now who Airbnb hosts are actually offering isolation bookings, where they will deliver all the meals without contact and make sure the place is physically stocked up. And I think that's a clever. Unfortunately, we live a little far away from ours to be able to do that easily. But who knows, we might have to. Nothing much has changed there. So it's merely a matter of much more social distancing and just not going out anywhere near as much.
Right.
But because of this news checking thing, you know, I found myself winding myself up with unnecessary anxiety, perhaps. And then when I realised what was going on and thinking, hang on a minute, you know, there's a reality check I have to have here. And actually talking to my mother helped, because she, not that she knows how to process me specifically, but she just, because it's reminding her of tough times in her childhood.
Sure.
She lived in London during the war. She was, 5 or 6. And so they would remember the air raid sirens, and they would all have to pile into the bunkers while, buildings were destroyed around them, including, on my dad's side, including his parents. Their house was completely destroyed. They lost everything. Luckily, didn't lose their lives, but so the bunkers saved a lot of people. But you think, okay, there's a time where, as she said, her mother and her grandmother all had to go into these bunkers along with crowds of other people. They were confined for long periods of time. They didn't have the same social media that we did. They didn't have, they had food rationing, for example. So it's helped to do a bit of contrasting. You know, what's really at stake here? If all we've got at stake is toilet paper, for goodness sake, that's something I can get over.
Right.
But you do feel that sort of, and I joke about it, but it does make you feel, as I said before, you go into a supermarket and you think, ah! Mm-hmm. So I come home and I've got that state partially running through me. We've been doing yoga, that definitely helps. Mm-hmm. But I think to come back to your precise question about what you do in terms of writing, I think it's much more about state control. It is much more about finding, is it your place? Is it the music you listen to? Is it you've got to reread something first? What is it that you can do to temporarily shut off that outside chatter?
Yes.
We've always said that anyway. Every writer's advice is turn off the internet. Don't do anything else. Turn off all your other applications on your computer, and just immerse yourself. Now, there's probably never been a better time to do that, but you've probably got to work a little bit harder to get out of those jittery emotions and those feelings of anxiety. And that might be 10 deep breaths. It might be something you've never done before. You might just have a quick walk around the street and then come back again if you can do that where you live. So, yeah, I think it's a lot about state control.
It is, and I think it can be very helpful to ask ourselves, is this an anxiety I need to be feeling right now? If your loved one has it or you suspect has the virus, then maybe you can't escape that anxiety. But if you're feeling the general anxiety of everything going on in the world right now, that anxiety is going to be there in an hour or tonight or tomorrow or, whatever time you can carve out for yourself later. So if you can distance yourself emotionally enough to be creative, and maybe you can't distance enough to work on your book project, but you can distance enough to do some journaling, some reflection, some processing, some yoga. The other thing that came to mind while you were talking, Robert, is that paying attention to what we're feeling now and what's happening now is something we can use down the road when we're writing. So maybe the isolation and the fear and the kind of suffocating feelings we experience now, if we put a character in that, say, World War II bomb shelter with the air raid sirens going off, we can then draw on this feeling we've experienced and amplify it appropriately, right? And put it into our character situation in whatever setting that might be. Kathryn knows when I'm looking at her. Okay, your turn.
Well, I think I probably have a little different situation. So when I have to switch to let's go everything online, my workload just doubled for a while because I have to figure out how to change curriculum over to be available online, how to present online lessons in a way that works. So my writing has gone from here's my writing time to, oh no, now I have to do this and now I have to do that and then I can write. And then on top of all of that, then you have, okay, now I'm exhausted and I'm emotionally exhausted and I'm, so my writing has taken such a backseat. It's not even funny.
Right.
And I think we have to, again, we preach this all the time, give yourself grace, right? Because we are in the middle of a transitional time. And even if you work from home semi-regularly and now it's just all the time, there are habits and things and, everything's going to be changing for everybody. And so, maybe now your kids are home all day long.
Yes.
What do you do with them?
Gosh.
So I know, right? So I think even if you say, oh my gosh, I have all this time now that I should be writing, like give yourself a chance to settle into this new normal because unfortunately it looks like it's going to be around for a while before you start badgering yourself into, I'm not writing, I'm not doing what I wanted to do. So yeah, this is kind of transitional time right now.
Right. I'm really glad you said that, Kathryn, because I'm sure many people can relate to that. I mean, I can relate to it on the psychological level. I had a trip planned for this week and it got canceled. And, my make lemonade out of lemons was, well, I already cleared this week of appointments, so I'll just have a writer's retreat, a little staycation. Well, no.
No.
There's been enough other tasks to catch up on. And then just the mood, the mental distractions, the worry. So I'm hoping maybe tomorrow I'll get a day of writer's retreat in. But yeah, and then what you described is on top of that, all of the physical transitions, the, work-oriented transitions that so many people are experiencing. And that is very real and time-consuming, and yeah.
Kathryn, have you got time to read?
I have been reading.
Great.
Because it's amazing how when you're emotionally exhausted and you can't face putting words on a page, it's okay to sit on a couch wrapped in a blanket with your book, my phone, but my book, and just let your brain chill out and just read something. So yeah, I've been reading more, which I've been very much enjoying. So
yeah, because I'm thinking that, as much as the sort of what do you call that, the opportunity, turning, the silver cloud, all that, yes, we're all isolated, but yeah, great, it means you can write. But what if it makes it worse for you? As you said, could it perhaps physically, there are children to look after, or you're just so distressed, then I think reading is one of the best things that any writer can be doing at any time anyway. And if it's what soothes you right now, do it. Don't guilt trip into, well, I've got all this time at home, I should, in quotes, be writing. Then if you really can't, then I think actually, as you said, give yourself some grace and make sure you're doing something that is at least connected. And I think reading is one of those wonderful things that you can do. And look, it could be reading about craft. It doesn't have to be fiction. I would personally choose fiction because of the transportation.
Right. Right. The emotional relief of not being in your current reality for a little bit.
Exactly.
Yeah. Any other thoughts we want to share about this as craft or process, as writing artists here? All right. Well, then let's just say, stay healthy, everybody. Our thoughts and hearts are with you all as we write our way through this crisis. Thank you for listening to the StoryWorks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at storyworkspodcast.com.